Winters joins us. Natalie, the president's being besieged on every side. Now we're going on offense again, particularly on legal. Pam Bondi put one across the bow of Letitia James and Alvin Bragg, starting with sanctuary cities. And, hey, if you're breaking the law, she told them, Pam Bondi, will deal with it. I think she's going to find a lot more about what they're doing, breaking the law up there. But it's good that she gave an introduction on the illegal alien criminal front. You've got every group on the left now. And here's DeGrasse on this front. They're focus grouping this. They're polling. They're looking for any angle into this, and the groups are all over it. Radical judges are all over it. They're running around trying to go to every federal court in the land. The media's trying to pick themselves up and dust themselves off. It's all a little feckless and hapless right now, but they're trying to get a rally point. Natalie Winters, what do you got for us?
Sure, it's an opening bid, but I'll definitely take it. But I think this sort of signals the Trump administration's broader efforts to really double, if not triple down on all things immigration and, of course, the mass deportations. It's just been breaking over at the Washington Post that two of the top ICE officials, particularly the buried lead there in the enforcement wing, have been let go because reassigned because the Trump administration didn't think that they were kind of up to par in terms of the numbers of deportees and just executing the various deportation raids. But I also think to that moment, that press conference that we were watching, there was a very important question, which I think sort of gets to the heart of all of this, right? How they are sort of fomenting their resistance. And they asked about the supposed FBI leak that potentially compromised a Los Angeles area ICE raid. That was a story that we had sort of discussed last Saturday on War Room. It was broken in the LA Times. They were believing that it had sort of come from an FBI source. Kristi Noem had then sort of carried on, said that over the weekend. Tom Homan confirming that earlier today. And of course, Pam Bondi then signaling that there should be repercussions and ramifications for any FBI officials who sort of worked against, basically conspiring against President Trump and ICE officials to carry out these raids. But I think that sort of gets to the core of it, right? You're talking about opposition, whether it's coming from the embeds, as we, I think, properly refer to these bureaucrats or if it's coming from the media or the courts. But
Natalie, hang on. This is so mind blowing, and it's been put in our face of how sacred the FBI is. I just want to make sure the audience understands this. Homan is setting, and these are not raids or not operations, as they call them, to maybe take the families back home and put them on a plane or do, and eventually you're going to have to get there. They're going after kind of the bad hombres. You heard MSM 13 in New York, but they're going after the baddest of the bad hombres right now as they kind of triage this thing. The FBI, and they had a big raid planned for L.A., as you know, is one of the railheads of illegal, L.A. County, both as a way station and as a destination. The FBI, people in the FBI leaked it, that a raid was coming, thus putting ICE agents in harm's way, and I think leading Homan at the last minute to come to a tactical decision to either call off all of it or at least a significant part of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And by the way, it was just, I think, about one day before Chuck Schumer launched his whole, Senate whistleblower portal. And of course, the idea of a whistleblower being sort of, I think, very strong sentiment among the resistance type organizations. They have very strong legal pipelines for all these kind of civil servants or FBI agents, pick your agency, to sort of become their very own version of an activist. And I think that this story in particular proves why we need Kash Patel. But remember that there was a buried lead too in that story. There was a comment sort of off the record from someone who I believe is a former ICE official saying that, well, yeah, there's definitely going to be some boots on the ground to take issue with the orders of President Trump. So they're going to find a way to resist however they choose. And that is the issue, right? That is what President Trump is trying to stop with his deconstruction of the administrative state. So all of this then goes back to the judges, what they're doing with trying to block them from doing the federal spending freezes. And just, I think it's the unitary theory of the executive, right? The ability that President Trump should be able to have, imagine this, loyal people working for him, not people who are going to leak and dox information that's going to lead to ICE agents getting killed.
Left up to their typical tricks, and depending on the courts, depending on lawfare, I think they could get some rude awakenings because I believe that these executive orders, since the Project 2025, America First Law under Stephen Miller, America First Parties under Brooks Rollins, took years to think this through, so they're not messing around. Your thoughts, ma'am?
Well, look, they certainly have admitted out loud. I think, Ali Velshi spent, months dedicating an entire show to sort of counter programming, reverse engineering a lot of what Project 2025 stood for, right? So they, to some extent, understand our legal playbook. But unfortunately, I think constitutionality and the truth is on our side, right? And I think, frankly, too, the media's narrative, which, like we've really been hammering on this show, is really their only method of pushing back. And I, of course, have a front row seat to all that being in and around the White House briefing room. This idea that we're barreling towards a constitutional crisis is sort of the narrative of the day. But I just don't think that that's particularly salient or powerful. I think it sort of goes into the kind of Doge matrix of, the same people who've been okay with unelected bureaucrats running this country for years are now upset about so-called unelected bureaucrats, although I would argue much more competent in terms of actually deconstructing the administrative state. But the lawfare will not obviously go away. They'll court shop it or what insert verb there. In other words, they will adjust, right? The variable, the sort of conduit through which they choose to try to oppose President Trump's executive orders, whatever it may be. It's not just going to go away. They're not going to concede. I'm sure the left will be rather angry at this judge. I'm sure they'll probably say it was anticipatory obedience. That's their idea. But Democracy Forward, I believe, in concert with a lot of union groups, had brought this suit in particular. This judge out of Massachusetts, I also believe was an Obama judge, with sort of a similarly radical track record to a lot of the judges that have been exposed, like the one we went after this morning. But also, too, I think the threat of impeachment against a lot of these judges, they know deep down that they're acting outside of legal norms. They're acting extra constitutional. I wouldn't even say unconstitutional. Those are valid threats. And I think this morning you've seen Elon Musk and a lot of people sort of start to call for that. Pam Bondi was sort of alluding to it in an interview with Fox. President Trump kind of echoed that sentiment. Even Caroline Leavitt was asked about it today. So I think that they've maybe realized that they've sort of poked a bear, for lack of a better word. And I think that the Trump administration has signaled, with what you just saw from Pam Bondi, they're not messing around. Republicans in Congress, maybe. But I think the White House is certainly not. But just to sort of link this back to the immigration stuff and to Pam Bondi's press conference, it is quite, I would say, interesting watching the media sort of adapt in real time and trying to come up with their various narratives to sort of push back against whatever the crisis may be. For example, right, yesterday you have that reporter saying, well, actually, Elon and President Trump, it wasn't bad that we sent the condoms, $50 million worth of them, because we sent them to Mozambique and not Gaza. And that shows you, right, the mindset that sort of plagues these people. It's like, no, that's still an issue. But today there's been an interesting narrative on sort of the mass deportation front. The Guardian had a big piece up, I think the studio has it, saying that, quote, misleading ICE data is laying the groundwork for mass deportation, advocates say. And they're essentially in meltdown because they're saying that, and I quote, only 21% of the people who they've been deporting have a felony criminal conviction. The vast majority are misdemeanor offenders. So they're in real time. It's like a real-time exercise, trial by fire, just throwing every narrative that they can against President Trump. I think they got the most victories with the lawfare stuff, so that's why they're sticking with it. But I think that was maybe just temporary hope, right? Because eventually, I think reality, which is, I don't know, the Constitution and the courts, maybe a little bit of retribution in the form of Pam Bondi is gonna hit him square in the face, metaphorically.
So Rachel Maddow, who's now doing it 5 nights a week, you tell she's not happy with that. She took a $5 million cut working one night a week. She was making 30. Now she's working 5 nights a week, at least for the first 100 days, 25. Her new thing, and you outlined this, I think 6, 7, 8 months ago, autocratic breakthrough. And I want to tie it to Norm Eisen and the work he's doing, but isn't this like this quick decision by the judge at the frontline level to say, nah, I've looked at it, this is okay, where now they have to lose and they got to go to the appellate? Isn't that going to start? A couple of these are going to break their back on this autocratic breakthrough. because it's going to show that actually the courts have checked the Constitution. What President Trump is doing is fully inside of his mandate under the unified theory of the executive as chief executive of the United States government, ma'am?
Well, it's because these aren't courts in the traditional legal sense, right? They're activists, and that's why they're court shopping. And you are right to link this back to the whole kind of autocratic breakthrough matrix, right? They're very intentional with the words that they choose to describe President Trump as. And right now, the word of the day is autocrat, right? Because like we said, it gives them the pretext to then justify outside of the system change. That's sort of the political theorist term of it. They love citing Ziblatt and Levitsky, the famous political scientists who sort of talk about the breakdown in democracies, how you turn into or transform into an autocracy. Anytime you hear them invoke Viktor Orban or any of these other Eastern European countries, they're trying to draw a parallel there to say, well, hey, just like USAID went in and tried to carry out color revolutions there and everywhere else, well, that's what we're going to do here in the United States. And that democracy playbook, right, the book that we keep talking about, that just last weekend, Norm Eisen quite literally admitted, basically held up on air on MSNBC and said, yeah, this is what we're doing to try to depose the democratically elected President Donald J. Trump. One of the key pillars in that is using the courts to do that. I think the word court is mentioned like 50 times throughout the entire document. So they're certainly going to double down on this. But Steve, I also think too, just from a meta narrative perspective, the way that they have framed what is going on at DOJ, right? The hypocrisy of caring about unelected bureaucrats aside, they make it seem like it's this roving, marauding band of unelected people who are just out to enrich Elon Musk and to enrich President Trump. The key point that you always hear, right, that there's no oversight. There's no oversight, because I know Washington, D.C. and the media, they care so much about oversight empirically. I think the 4 years of Joe Biden, I beg to differ. But the reason why they're framing it through this lens is because it goes back to this concept of autocratic breakthrough, right? They love the idea of unelected bureaucrat, unelected president Elon Musk because it totally fits with that narrative, with that trope. And they've tried to paint it not as this cutting waste, fraud, and abuse exercise, but as autocratic and oligarchic. And sure, maybe there's some legitimacy if you want to have this sort of tech bro discussion about what transhumanism means and how they carry it out. But that's a different, more nuanced conversation, right? They are invoking that in this whole Doge thing. They love the idea of really projecting, because at the end of the day, they're the ones defending authoritarian regimes abroad, but sort of conceiving of the idea of Doge as this authoritarian, what do they always say, takeover, because it gives them more legitimacy to then push back with these bogus court rulings, because then these judges, as you can see on the left, all I do is consume left-wing media, right? These judges are being hailed as the saviors of democracy and standing on the front line. So in their twisted, warped worldview, they're not attacking President Trump like they did in 2016, right? It's different. It's not hair on fire, screaming, melting down about everything. It's much more measured, because they actually have a playbook that we've read and we've discussed on this show, but they don't gain anything from depicting him as erratic and crazy and all over the place. They gain more from their color revolution vantage point in depicting him as this very calculated, very smart, very autocratic, democratic, backsliding individual, because then they can dip into their revolutionary toolkit that not just the media hacks, but academics and that whole sort of democracy, lawfare, journo crew of people who really probably need to be investigated and have more than just their security clearances revoked. But they then have the moral, they would view it that way, and just political cover to really engage in what I always say is that outside of the system change. And right now you're seeing that with these, extrajudicial decisions.
Amazing. Natalie, social media, where can folks get you? And we'll see you back here tomorrow.
Well, hey, and speaking of autocrats, I would love to congratulate President Trump on his unanimous election to the board of the Kennedy Center. Very exciting. You can follow me, Natalie G. Winters, on all platforms. Yeah.
That was Grinnell. Grinnell said we're going to have an explosive announcement at 2:00. It was Trump's unanimous. The head Visigoth now in charge of the high church. Natalie, thank you so much. Get back to work, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.